Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're sharing a story inspired by real challenges that nurses and patients face every day. It shows how a busy night in a recovery room can turn tragic, and how one nurse coped with the consequences. Let's begin. Olivia Hart tightened the drawstring on her scrubs as the sliding doors of St. Matthew's Medical Center opened and a cool breath of midnight air followed her inside. The hospital lobby, usually bright and buzzing, felt almost sleepy at this hour, and she liked that quiet moment before a shift began, before pagers screamed and monitors chimed. She signed in at the nurse's station and collected her badge. "Third floor, post-op," the charge nurse said, handing her a clipboard. "Busy night. 2 emergency surgeries coming up, so keep an eye on the fresh recoveries." Olivia smiled politely even though her stomach tightened. It had been a grueling week. She was only 2 years into her nursing career, and nights like this, when she was short on sleep and running on coffee, tested every ounce of her training. Still, she loved the work. She loved easing patients through the fog of anesthesia, loved being the calm voice in a storm of beeping machines. The post-anesthesia care unit was dimly lit, all soft blues and whites. Machines hummed steadily. A few patients dozed, their faces slack under oxygen masks. Olivia's mentor, Priya Patel, waved from the supply cart and murmured, "Full house tonight. We've got Mr. Hayes coming out of gallbladder surgery in 10 minutes. Routine case, but he's 72 with mild COPD. Keep the oxygen on and check the IV every 30. Olivia nodded and asked about the new pump. Patel rolled her eyes and said, "Fussy, make sure you verify the line before you leave the bay." A shrill tone from across the room pulled Patel away, leaving Olivia to prepare Bay 5. She smoothed the sheets, adjusted the pulse ox clip, and made sure the drip stand was ready. Mr. Hayes arrived soon after, pale but smiling weakly as orderlies transferred him from the stretcher. "You're in good hands, sir," Olivia said gently. "I'll be right here while you wake up." He mumbled something she could not catch. Drifting in and out of sleep, she attached the oxygen cannula, checked the IV running a clear solution, and settled into her rhythm, vitals, documentation, reassurance. The monitors displayed steady numbers and everything seemed ordinary. Half an hour passed in a blur of tasks. Another patient vomited, someone else needed blood pressure medication, and a resident asked Olivia to help with a dressing change. She moved quickly, glancing back at Mr. Hayes whenever she could. When she returned to Bay 5, the ward felt different, sharper somehow, like a storm about to break. Mr. Hayes lay still, his chest rising shallowly beneath the blanket. The steady beep of his heart monitor had slowed. Olivia's pulse spiked as she stepped closer, checking his tubing. The IV bag was nearly empty, and a second line, a clear plastic drip connected to the same port, caught her eye. The label blurred in her tired vision, but the color code made her stomach lurch. It was not the saline she had assumed. Before she could react, a soft alarm chimed from the monitor, and oxygen saturation numbers began to drop. She tugged at the nasal cannula and saw that one prong hung loose. Panic clawed at her throat. "Priya!" she shouted. Patel appeared almost instantly, followed by Dr. Rowan, the anesthesiologist. They swept in with brisk, precise motions, checking the airway and calling for crash cart supplies. Olivia stepped back, heart hammering, hands trembling so hard she nearly dropped her gloves. They worked for minutes that felt like hours, but the flat line on the screen did not change. Rowan finally removed his gloves and met Olivia's eyes with a grave expression. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "He's gone." The words struck her like ice water. Mr. Hayes lay peaceful as if sleeping, but the life had drained from the room. Olivia's hands were still frozen in mid-air, holding a syringe she had never used. How had it gone wrong so fast? She replayed the last hour, the IV, the oxygen, the endless parade of tasks, but everything blurred together, a jumble of fragments. One thing was clear, somewhere in that blur she had missed something important. Patel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Step out for a moment, Olivia. Take a breath." Olivia stumbled into the hallway and leaned against the cool wall. Her reflection in the window looked pale and small. She had come into this job to help people heal, to keep them safe, and tonight a man had died under her watch. The quiet hallway outside the recovery ward felt unreal as Olivia Hart stood there, heart still pounding from the code that had just ended. A man had died only a few feet away, and she could still hear the faint echo of the flatline tone inside her head. She wanted to run back in and undo the last hour, but the door behind her clicked softly, and Priya Patel stepped out, face lined with concern. "Take a seat in the lounge for a minute," Priya said gently. "You need to breathe." Olivia nodded numbly and walked to the small staff lounge where she sank onto a vinyl chair. The fluorescent light hummed above her, throwing a harsh glare over the table scattered with empty coffee cups. She clasped her hands together, staring at her knuckles as if they belonged to someone else. Moments later, the charge nurse entered with a clipboard and sat across from her. "Olivia, we need a brief account of what happened," she said, voice steady but kind. "Just the basics so we can start the incident report." Olivia swallowed hard and described what she remembered, checking Mr. Hayes' vitals, attaching the oxygen cannula, verifying the IV, helping another patient, then coming back to find him unresponsive. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and she admitted she had not double-checked the second line because she thought it was saline. The charge nurse nodded, jotting notes, then explained that risk management and the anesthesiology team would review everything. After she left, Olivia sat in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on her chest. She could not shake the image of Mr. Hayes' still face or the sound of Dr. Rowan saying, "He's gone." The rest of her shift blurred into a fog. She helped with paperwork, gathered Mr. Hayes' belongings, and tried to focus on the remaining patients, but guilt followed her everywhere. When dawn broke and sunlight spilled through the hospital windows, Olivia felt as if she had aged years in a single night. At home later that morning, she barely noticed the smell of fresh coffee drifting from her kitchen. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the blank wall, replaying the scene again and again. Each time she searched for something she might have done differently. The drip, the oxygen, the label on the line. She remembered Patel's earlier warning to verify the pump and felt a twist of shame. Sleep refused to come, and when she finally dozed off, she dreamed of alarms and tangled tubing. The next afternoon, the hospital called and asked her to meet with the patient safety committee. She dressed carefully, hands shaking as she buttoned her blouse, and drove back to St. Matthew's with a knot in her stomach. The meeting room was small, with pale walls and a round table surrounded by chairs. Dr. Rowan sat with two administrators from Quality Assurance, a legal representative, and Priya Patel. They invited Olivia to sit, offered her water, and began gently but formally. Rowan explained that every unexpected death triggered an investigation, not to punish but to learn. He asked Olivia to recount the entire shift in detail. Her palms were damp as she spoke, describing the steps she had taken, the interruptions, the moment she saw the second line, the alarm, the frantic attempts to save Mr. Hayes. She admitted she had not recognized the medication in the drip bag, assuming it was saline, and had not noticed the oxygen prong slipping free. The administrators listened carefully, asking clarifying questions. One of them, a woman named Ms. Thompson, pointed out that staffing levels were unusually low that night and several nurses were covering extra bays. Another noted that the labeling on the medication line might have been hard to read in low light. Patel spoke up, saying Olivia was diligent and normally meticulous, but fatigue and the chaos of the shift had set her up for a dangerous oversight. Rowan sighed quietly and added that while system issues existed, medication lines required verification before connecting to a patient, and oxygen flow always needed confirmation. His tone was not harsh, but the weight of his words settled heavily on Olivia's shoulders. She felt tears prick her eyes, not from anger but from the crushing realization that Mr. Hayes' final moments might have been preventable. After the meeting, Patel walked with her to the parking lot. "You did the right thing by being honest," she said softly. "That takes courage. This process is hard, but it's meant to make sure it doesn't happen again." Olivia nodded, though her throat felt too tight for words. At home that evening, she sat on her balcony, staring at the fading sky. She thought about Mr. Hayes' family, who would soon receive a call explaining that a routine surgery had ended in loss. She wished she could tell them how sorry she was, how she had wanted nothing more than to protect him. The sunset burned orange, then softened to gray, and she felt hollow yet strangely determined. She could not undo the past, but she could face what came next. Tomorrow she would return to the hospital for another shift, and she would carry the memory of Mr. Hayes as a reminder of how much every detail mattered. The morning after the committee meeting, Olivia Hart woke to the sound of rain brushing against her bedroom window. She sat up slowly, her body heavy from a restless night, and stared at the muted gray sky. A part of her wanted to call in sick, to hide under the covers and forget the hospital even existed, but another part knew she had to face what lay ahead. She brewed a cup of coffee and scrolled through her messages, finding one from Priya Patel, "Thinking of you today. Don't be hard on yourself. Meet me for lunch after your shift." The words steadied her more than she expected. At St. Matthew's, the corridors hummed with the usual rhythm of beeping monitors and shuffling feet, yet Olivia felt like she was moving underwater. A few colleagues offered quiet smiles, others glanced at her with sympathy before looking away. She focused on simple tasks, changing dressings, adjusting pillows, speaking gently to patients. Every time she touched an IV line, she double-checked the label twice, then a third time for good measure. Midway through the day, Rowan stopped by. His tone was calm, professional. "The hospital will hold a formal review next week," he said. "It's standard after an incident. You'll have a chance to explain everything in detail." Olivia nodded, her stomach twisting. She wanted to ask how bad it might be, but she sensed he could not give her an answer. After he left, she felt an ache behind her eyes, the weight of a future she could not yet see. And Priya sat across from her in the cafeteria, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We've all made mistakes, even serious ones. What matters is learning and showing the committee you take this seriously." Olivia listened, grateful for the quiet support. Still, she could not ignore the knot of dread coiling tighter with every mention of the hearing. When she returned to the ward, she forced herself to breathe deeply and keep her attention on the present moment. She reminded herself that the patients in front of her needed her focus, not the ghosts of yesterday. That small act of discipline gave her a fragile sense of control. That evening, Olivia sat in a corner booth of a small cafe near her apartment, a place she often visited to clear her thoughts. She opened her journal and began to write, something she had not done since nursing school. At first the words came haltingly, fragments of regret, fear, and self-reproach. Then they shifted to questions about the system she worked within, the dim lighting at night, the cluttered recovery bays, the pressure to hurry between patients. She realized the tragedy was not only about her actions but also about how easily an exhausted nurse could miss a single dangerous detail. The insight did not erase her responsibility, but it softened the harsh edges of her guilt. The next few days blurred into a steady rhythm of work and reflection. Olivia sought advice from a senior nurse who had once been through a similar inquiry. "Stay factual," the woman advised. "Bring any notes you have. And remember, the panel isn't there to destroy you. They want to understand what went wrong so they can prevent it happening again." On the morning of the hearing, Olivia dressed in a navy blazer and plain skirt, her hands trembling as she fastened the last button. At the hospital conference suite, she paused outside the door, breathing slowly until her heartbeat steadied. Inside, a long table stretched beneath bright lights. Rowan Patel, 2 administrators, and a patient safety consultant waited. They welcomed her politely and asked her to take a seat. As she opened her folder of notes, Olivia felt a flicker of courage. Whatever came next, she owed it to Mr. Hayes and to herself, to speak honestly and to help the hospital understand how a single overlooked detail had led to loss. She squared her shoulders, ready to face the questions. The hearing began with quiet introductions, the panelists thanking Olivia for attending and reminding her that the purpose was to understand the event in detail. Rowan invited her to describe the entire shift from the moment she arrived at the recovery ward. Her voice was steady at first, outlining the patient handovers, the dimly lit bays, and the rush of post-operative arrivals. But as she reached the moment when Mr. Hayes' monitor alarmed, her throat tightened. She paused, collected herself, and went on, explaining how she had believed the drip contained saline, how the oxygen cannula had slipped unnoticed, how she had tried to respond once she realized something was wrong. She ended with a resuscitation attempt that came too late. The panel thanked her for her openness. They asked about staffing ratios, the labeling of medications, and how communication had worked that night. Priya spoke about the shortage of nurses and the way tasks had piled up unexpectedly. Rowan noted that the IV line was prepared by another department and that its label was printed in small, pale lettering. The patient safety consultant pointed out that the recovery room lighting was not ideal for quickly checking lines, especially during overnight shifts. As the discussion continued, Olivia felt a gradual shift. The focus was widening from her individual error to the chain of conditions that had allowed a single slip to grow into a fatal outcome. It did not excuse her oversight, yet it revealed a web of factors she had never fully considered. When the questions ended, the panel took a short recess. Olivia stepped into the hallway, leaning against the cool wall while Priya offered her a reassuring smile. A few minutes later, they were invited back, and Rowan read the findings. The review confirmed that the patient had died from lingering anesthesia and inadequate oxygen supply, compounded by an unmonitored infusion line. Olivia's failure to double-check the drip and oxygen was identified, but so were broader issues: dim lighting, confusing labels, and insufficient staff on duty. The committee recommended new color-coded tags for post-operative infusions, a mandatory 2-step check for oxygen flow, and an adjustment to night staffing levels. For Olivia, they proposed additional training, a brief suspension from direct recovery care, and mentoring with a senior nurse before returning fully to that role. Relief and sorrow mingled in her chest. The decision acknowledged her mistake yet offered a route to rebuild trust and competence. As the meeting closed, Rowan looked at her kindly. "We know you came into this profession to help people," he said. "Let this be a turning point, not an ending." On the way out, Olivia felt a tentative lightness, as if a heavy storm cloud had thinned enough to let through a ray of sun. She still mourned Mr. Hayes, but now there was a path forward, a chance to honor him by becoming an even safer, more attentive nurse. A week after the hearing, Olivia Hart returned to the recovery ward for her first supervised shift. She arrived early, pausing at the entrance to take in the familiar scent of disinfectant and the low murmur of voices beyond the doors. The ward looked the same, yet she felt different, calmer, more deliberate, carrying the memory of Mr. Hayes like a quiet companion. Priya met her with a warm smile and handed her a checklist the hospital had introduced for post-operative patients. Every drip was now marked with bright tags, and oxygen connections were highlighted with bold tape. Olivia felt a surge of gratitude toward the colleagues who had worked to implement those changes so quickly. As the morning progressed, she moved through her tasks with careful precision, reading each label aloud, tracing every line from pump to patient, confirming oxygen flow before turning away. There was no rushing, no background haze of distraction, only steady focus. By lunchtime, she realized that her breathing had settled into a rhythm as steady as the monitors surrounding her. When a young patient stirred and asked softly for water, Olivia smiled and offered reassurance, reminded of why she had chosen nursing in the first place, to ease fear and protect people at their most vulnerable. That evening, Olivia walked home beneath a clear sky streaked with fading pink. She stopped at a park bench overlooking a small lake and let the cool air settle over her. She thought of Mr. Hayes, of the night that had changed everything, and of the hard days that followed. There was still sorrow, but it no longer felt like an anchor pulling her under. Instead, it had become a guide, urging her to honor the lessons his loss had taught. She opened her journal, writing slowly about the new safety steps, about the kindness she had received from Priya, and even from Rowan, about the quiet determination she now carried into each shift. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Olivia closed the notebook and sat for a long moment in stillness. She knew the memory of that night would never leave her, but it would also never define the whole of who she was. She had survived the weight of guilt, faced accountability, and chosen to grow. Rising from the bench, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring more patients, more lines to check, more oxygen levels to confirm, and she would meet every task with the diligence born of experience, a silent promise to keep every life entrusted to her as safe as humanly possible. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and have a story of your own, please email us and let us